You've entered BOOKSTORM with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back to BOOKSTORM Podcast. We are very grateful for all of our listeners. 69 countries, all 50 states, 1,350 cities across the U.S. And it's because of listeners like you and brilliant authors like the one we have with us here today. You're going to be very excited to see Karma Brown talking about her new release that will be out the same day as this podcast, What Wild Women Do, on October 24th. And Karma, welcome to BOOKSTORM.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, we're very excited about this book, but before we dive down deep into it, I want to tell our listeners a little bit about you. Karma Brown is the author of 7 best-selling novels, including the #1 international and USA bestseller, Recipe for a Perfect Wife. She's also the author of the nonfiction bestseller, The 4% Fix, How 1 Hour Can Change Your Life, which we loved. She writes holiday rom-com under the pen name Maggie Knox. And as if this isn't enough, she's also an award-winning journalist. Congratulations. We're thrilled that you're writing fiction. I want to quote the author Fiona Davis about this beautiful book, What Wild Women Do. Now, Fiona is a friend of BOOKSTORM Podcast. We've had her on our show. We love her. She definitely knows good fiction. And she says that this novel is a remarkable story of 2 complicated women, almost 50 years apart, trying to make a mark in a world that often demeans and trivializes their dreams. It's a book about feminism, friendship, and the creative spirit. Kristen and I could not agree more. It really touched a chord in our hearts. It spoke to us. And I want to add this about you. Karma Brown writes about women who have survived the hardest moments of their lives who are now on the path to thriving instead of merely surviving. She believes time is a fickle thing and there is little room to be tentative with our intentions. I believe that was a quote from one of the characters in this book as well. And yes. Karma, we totally agree. We could not agree more. Thank you for reminding all of us.
Well, thank you. And it's so funny because that is a quote from my 1975 feminist character. And the thing is, I know that came out of my brain. I wrote her, and so I wrote that, but it's one of those strange alchemies about writing where it's like, oh no, that's what Eddie Calloway says. But actually, I obviously deeply believe it as well. So it's funny being an author sometimes. Your characters just take on a life of their own.
Well, thank you for putting all of yourself in these characters, all of your feelings, all your thoughts, all your emotions. It's genuine, authentic, and we felt it.
Oh, thank you so much. That really means a lot to me.
Well, as Chris mentioned, Karma, we're here to talk about your new release, What Wild Women Do. And I give our listeners just a quick summary of what's going on in the story, but without giving away any spoilers, of course. Okay. And if you want to add anything at the end, we would love to hear it. In your story, Rowan dreams of being a Hollywood screenwriter, but she's a bit stuck both in her professional life and maybe in her relationship too. Seth, her fiance and an aspiring novelist, is also creatively challenged, even as his YouTube channel about their relationship and their life is growing. They retreat to an isolated cabin in the Adirondacks to hopefully get out of these creative ruts. And there, Rowan finds herself drawn into the mysterious disappearance of Eddie Calloway, a socialite-turned-feminist crusader. Now, Eddie disappeared in 1975 from one of the great old camps in the Adirondacks that was owned originally by her family. And Rowan finds a few clues while she's there in the woods, and she's drawn in. And she's especially intrigued by Eddie's greatest wish to help other women unlock their true, though long repressed wildness. Now, Rowan learned that Eddie had some enemies, and she starts digging in. And as she draws closer to the truth of what happened with Eddie, she starts to realize that her own future is beyond something that she even imagined for herself as well. We love this story. Is there anything you want to add just for that general backup?
I mean, that was perfect. And I'm wondering if you could just come around with me and, do that for me every time someone asks me what my book is about. I'll just be like, over to Kristen, thank you.
Absolutely. I'm there.
Amazing.
Everyone asks Kristen this, and she always says yes. And then I always say, I'll carry Kristen's briefcase.
Chris, you can come too. You can share it, just split it, and then you can each do part, and then I'll just go, yes.
We'd love to.
Yes.
Well, let's dive in. I've got to say, I love that character, Eddie. Her prior name was Edith Calloway, and I loved that Camp Calloway. She believed being a woman was the greatest gift. She said, I welcome you here to this camp to discover what you believe. Even Rowan, many years later, discovered something of herself long after the camp was shut down. The quote in your epigraph from Clarissa Pinkola Estes says, when women's lives are in status, inactivity, or off equilibrium, or they're filled with ennui, listlessness from a lack of cause, it is always time for wildish women to emerge. Both Eddie and Rowan needed a change, a jump start. Why is it so difficult to make a change, even for all of us women in the real world? Do we all need time away now and then?
Yes, I believe we all need time away now and then. One of the things that was really important to me with the story and the setting, I like to make my setting feel like another character in the book. And there is just nothing but time to get your head straight when you are surrounded by trees and nature and quietness. And I think it's a difficult thing to do as well, because then again, you have nothing else to do but to sit with your thoughts. And that can be a challenging thing, to sit with your own thoughts and to think, okay, what am I happy with? What are my aspirations? What are my dreams? What are my desires? It's hard to find the space to do that in our busy world where we are being constantly hit with news and notifications. And, it's really hard to get away. But I do think that we all need that. I mean, not even just women, but we're speaking about women specifically today. And I think that it is hard to escape the lives that we have that are often quite beautiful and lovely and fulfilling, but to remember that we are ourselves first. There is, we are ourselves, and then we are all sorts of other things as well. But sometimes those other things can take over that inner core of who you are, and you have to get reconnected. You have to remember, who you are and what you want, and see if there's anything you need to change or adjust.
And I liked your use of what wild women do, that word wild. It caught your eye, but it made the reader realize, are women stuck in an area of where we think we are expected to be, who we have throughout history been told we could or should be? And does it take an element of rebellion and wildness to become who we know in our hearts we should be? It made us realize maybe this is a more drastic change that we sometimes need.
Yeah, it might be. It might be a very drastic change. I mean, sometimes you have to blow up your life a little bit to move to the next phase. We have one life. We get this one beautiful, amazing life, and that's it. And so we should all be really working hard to make sure we're doing the things that fulfill us and sustain us. And, when we turn at the end and look back, that we don't have, I mean, everyone always has a few regrets, but, you should feel that it has been a life well lived. And, we had a lot of conversations about the term wild. I was very clear from the outset of this book that I know that people think wild as being like brash and you have to go do something really dramatic and like blow it up and be super courageous. But to me, there's a lot of wildness in just those quiet moments and those quiet choices that we make that may be very subtle in the grand scheme of things, but in our own lives are quite significant. And so that, the wild can be so many different things. It's courage is not always loud and brash. It can be quiet too.
That's very wise. I actually thought wild more like freedom.
Yes. Yeah. And freedom, again, sometimes it doesn't mean letting everything go. Sometimes it's simply giving yourself permission to do something a little bit different.
Thank you.
Karma, the natural world in your story served as backdrop, inspiration, as teacher. And I love the passages discussing trees specifically. We read about how trees communicate with one another through these underground networks of fungi. And at one point, Jess tells Rowan, and this is a quote, they communicate what they need, and then they send each other nourishment. What was Jess possibly trying to communicate to Rowan? And I was wondering what you think we can learn about thinking about how the trees communicate and reach out for what they need.
Yeah, I think there's so much to learn. I was blown away by trees when I was doing my research for the story. And one of the things that I had mentioned in the Dear Reader letter is about how trees get stronger when they're blown around in the wind because it allows the roots to anchor better into the ground. Which I think is just such a beautiful way to think about life and being tossed around a little bit and how that can make you stronger. But, Jess was always trying to give Rowan not advice so much, but just another perspective. And she would do it in these subtle ways, like talking about the nourishment that the trees were giving one another. And it's in some ways, I think it was her saying, you can trust me.
Mm-hmm.
Not like she's had more years of life and so she can be condescending about maybe the choices Rowan's making, but just more as a friend and as a someone to just be honest with and to tell her truth to. And that relationship can really be significant, especially for women. I mean, you have this lived experience that until you've lived this experience, you don't really know what it's like. It's a hard thing to have someone else's lived experience. And so having friends and having women who you trust, who are different ages and stages and doing different things, creates this wonderful network, much like the trees and the fungi that are nourishing them. So, it was really fascinating to uncover some of that and then to be able to, try to fit it into Jess and her wisdom that she was offering to Rowan.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, first of all, I did not think that Jess was real throughout the whole book. I thought for sure.
You didn't?
No, I thought there was something otherworldly about her, but it was that age-old wisdom, I think, coming through. And I loved that. And I was also thinking too that it's very hard for women taking care of a lot of other people and a lot of other situations to reach out and say, here's what I need. And Chris and I were just talking about how it's hard because we're so busy with our lives. For us to even check in with our friends at that level, you have to be intentional.
You do. And I love that you thought Jess was almost paranormal. I think with Jess, she has peace because she has created a life where there's space for her to think and to do what's important to her and to be present in her life. And I think having that peace is really, I seek that all the time. I'm looking for that myself. And I just turned 51 a few days ago, but my 50th year was really about me trying to sort that out. Like I was, trying to be a little more like Jess and find that peace in that space. But now I'm kind of wishing I'd made her like a ghost or something. But no, she's real.
The next book. Save that for the next one.
Yes, that's right. There'll be a ghost.
I loved that both Eddie and Rowan showed the reader that every one of us has a backstory, a prior history, some life experience that has influenced who we have become, both good and bad. The gathering of all these different types of women in one place, away from the noise of the world, it seemed to enable them to talk more freely about their lives and to maybe even see their own lives more clearly. The reader came to realize that Eddie was onto something very important here with this retreat. Women helping women, confiding, connecting, sharing, supporting. Why is it so imperative at times to know that we're not the only ones who have struggled or are struggling?
Well, because it's so lonely. I mean, it's really lonely to be in that place where you feel like you can't reach out to someone, or even if you do, you don't know what to say or how to ask for help, because it's really hard to ask for help or just to ask for someone to listen to you. And so we do need to have those relationships and those women in our lives. And I think that having women women friends is so important. I mean, I just went on a writing retreat with a dear author friend of mine. I don't think we shut up the entire time. And it was 5 days in Savannah, and we talked about everything. And some of the things were very similar because we're both authors, and other things we had nothing in common, but we were able to relate to one another and be a support. And so if you don't feel alone, it's like this, it's a rejuvenation almost to be able to say, okay, let me unload all these things that I'm worrying about that are rattling around in my brain. And it doesn't matter, you don't have to fix it. I mean, I have this amazing husband, but he's also a fixer. And so there's that element of like, how can we brainstorm a fix for this? And sometimes that's not what you need. You just need to be heard and just need to be listened to. So I'm very grateful for my women friends for that reason.
I just love that. And I also love that you're grouping women of all different shapes, sizes, backgrounds, cultures, nationalities, ages, that we have shared experiences, that we're experiencing similar hurts and hurdles and difficulties in this world. And that, yes, maybe we don't have answers, but we're a good place to vent. And how refreshing and comforting it is to know we're not alone. It spoke that very clearly.
Oh, I'm so glad. And I mean, it really is. Like, that's the whole point. We are not alone. And, you need to be able to reach out to people. You need to be present for when people need to reach out to you. And it's all imperfect. And, the second you think you have it all figured out, you have none of it figured out. So we are all just really doing the best that we can. But I think having those relationships, and with Eddie's camp, I wanted to create a space that was safe and that was very female, just power filled, and not to shy away from, I do some navel gazing when it comes to the feminist messages, and because I feel like we have to be explicit sometimes with the way we talk about that and talk about those relationships. So I really loved creating the camp, and just I want to go. I'd love to go to Eddie's camp for a week and just see what happens.
So would I. I said that to Kristen before we got on. I said, I want a camp like this that I can go to. You modeled this after a camp at Lake Sagamore that was owned by the Vanderbilt family. Is that right?
Yeah, Camp Sagamore was owned by the Vanderbilts, and I went there as a child a few times and had the experience. We stayed in Gloria Vanderbilt's cabin, like the one that she at was hers, because all the children had their own cabin. And it was such a magical place, really focused on nature. No, even now, like, you can't get Wi-Fi if you go there now, and you can go and stay. So it is truly a unplug from the world situation. And I crave that a lot now. We're so connected, and that's wonderful, but we're also so connected all the time. So yeah, I wanted to go back to Camp Sagamore and was supposed to, but COVID, we were locked down forever here in Canada. I mean, truly forever. So I couldn't go, but I will get back there.
I loved it. Thank you.
I'm one of those people who goes to the Adirondacks every year as well,
you
just for that
do.
reason. And it's truly unplugged. You can't get Wi-Fi even in the little town that you drive to.
No, you're just, and then you're forced to again do all the other things, and it's amazing. You just like, oh, okay,
Amazing.
well, actually, I can function without my phone like I used to all those years ago.
That's
So
right.
yeah.
Carmen, there's another beautiful analogy in your story relating to nettles. And Eddie described how they protect themselves with a tough outer shell, much like people who have experienced trauma or maybe even grief. But ultimately, she chose to live her life more outward focused. She was open to loving others. And I wanted to ask you, why did she choose to, quote, as she said, grasp her life firmly? And what was different about her thinking pattern there?
Well, because she, for me, Eddie was someone who really came into her own later, in her 40s. And it took a tragedy for her to get there. And I think that that tragedy really gave her that feeling of like, we have this one life. We have this one life. What do we want to do with it? What do I want to do with it? And I think she asked herself those questions for the first time ever, because she was very privileged and so wasn't required to really ask those questions of herself because her life was comfortable and taken care of. And so as soon as she was faced with this is no longer working, she had to make a choice. And so her choice was to decide, what, this is it. This is the only life I have. And so I'm going to go out there and do with it, what makes me happy. And that will then in turn help other people. I think she really wanted to offer that experience to other people. And that's what sent her out that way. So her grasping her life firmly was really like letting go of the life that she had and embracing this new one.
That goes back to that intentionality that we were talking about,
Yeah.
in our relationships, but also in our own lives and deciding who do we want to be and who is that true self that needs to come out and emerge.
Yeah, exactly. It really is that intentionality. That's a great way to look at it.
I couldn't help but jot down in the Camp Calloway handbook, she had written what wild women do, and she made a list. I want to say this for our listeners because I love it all. Make ourselves bigger, take up space, show emotion, are feminine, respect ourselves, enjoy life, trust other women, and be bold. How'd you come up with these wonderful things? Because they apply to us to this very day. And as I looked down there, I thought, yes, I am allowed to do all of those things. Why am I so intimidated sometimes to do some of these things that seem to be my right to do or to feel?
Yeah. Yeah, they are your right to do and to feel. And, I think that it's that learning that if someone else has an issue with that, that is actually none of your business. That's one of my favorite things to always say to my daughter now is, well, that's really how they feel about you is none of your business. You can only worry about yourself and how you're feeling and what, again, this is your one life. And I don't know that list. I wrote that title of that page in the handbook and I just wrote the list. So that was one of those times where I was like, well, Eddie's here and she's inside my head. And this is what she would like to say. And so I wrote it and I don't think it changed even in edits.
No, and that's what Kristen was feeling, that Eddie is still here amongst us, somehow giving us little words of wisdom. And so thank you to Eddie and Karma Brown for opening our eyes to women's rights and women's empowerment. And the beauty of being a woman is something to be celebrated. And that is what this book is about. And I have to say before I go, you're going to want to connect with Karma Brown. You can find her at the Penguin Random House website under her author name, where there's a newsletter. She's also on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. Am I missing any locations?
Nope, but I'm mostly on Instagram.
Okay, they can connect with you there.
Yeah, yeah.
And I want to sum this book up in your own words. An ode to female solidarity and strength, and a celebration of women who dare to defy societal expectations and limitations. Oh my goodness. That is exactly what Kristen and I are all about. This is like a dream, and we absolutely adored it. Thank you so much for being on Bookstorm. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you so much.
What a fantastic discussion with Karma Brown. Boy, she brought up some points that really hit home because think about our busy schedules. We are mothers, we are significant others, we are sisters, we're daughters. That doesn't leave a lot of time for us to be who we are. And pursuing that and having that permission almost to go in that direction is something that you got to kind of sit and think about.
Kristen, it's so true. So think of it. We are paying bills. We are taking care of children, spouses, significant others, friends.
Yeah.
And in the busyness of life, we miss out on what our gift or our talent is or our passion. It kind of made me think of when we started this podcast a year and a half ago. We just decided we love fiction, we love books, we love to write, and we're going to do it. And it came with an element of trepidation and a little anxiety and fear because we're very bold out here. And we just entered this business not having been known and embraced it. And it's been so wonderful.
Yeah.
It's really been our passion. We love everything we talk about on here. I think that's one good example of maybe how we've broken away. But it takes specific, like you said, intentionality to do
Yeah.
these things.
Well, in the story, that was something that both characters had to do. They had to break away from that old life and really embrace things that a lot of people were coming against them for it. You know, especially for Eddie. She had a lot of enemies because people were like, that's not your role. That's not how you should be behaving or acting. And now you're, permitting other women to come to your property and act like this. And so I loved that she was defiant without being to the point of being rude. She was trying to help people understand women by being who they were.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes, that's great because she had neighbors that were rising up against her and even pulling pranks on her, but she never fought back or got into an argument with them. She just stood firm that I'm doing something good in this camp and women are benefiting. And I'm sorry if you can't understand it. And maybe this goes back to what Karma Brown says and teaches her daughter. You don't worry about what anyone else is thinking. You do what you know is right for you. You stand up for the just cause, and you're never going to convince everyone. I love that. What about this character, Seth, who was the boyfriend, and he just wanted to do the YouTube? And his YouTube was gaining popularity, and he was making more and more money, and he was willing to give up his writing because he believed the YouTube would make him rich. I just thought, wow, how many people surrender their dream and trade it for wealth or fame? It's a scary walk to travel on.
absolutely, especially when the fame they're seeking is based upon things that are fake. And, I don't know that you can sustain that for very long. I think there's a part of you that stops and says, ugh, this isn't really who I am. And how long can I maintain this facade? So I think that Seth is going to have a reckoning in this story, just like Rowan did. And I actually am kind of excited for Seth because he's heading in a direction he doesn't understand how freeing it is, but he will.
And I always think of John D. Rockefeller said, if your goal is to become rich, you'll never achieve it. You do what you love, the money comes with it, but the money is not what makes life rich. Just sort of a good word of wisdom, I think, for everybody. Let me see what else. I loved Aiden and Jess. I got to bring this up. Two people living in the Adirondacks. You vacation there every year. I lived in the Adirondacks for 5 years. Honestly, the most beautiful place I've ever been. But they were forging from natural elements, living off the land and loving life, just loving it. I thought, how cool would that be? What would it take to do something like that? It's so far out of the norm. And you know that people would be so critical if you just pack some backpacks in a tent and decide to go live off the land.
Yeah. They were very isolated, but, that is one of the benefits of being isolated in nature is because now you are connecting with who you really are. You're alone with your thoughts. It's difficult to be alone with your thoughts, right? Because it forces you to kind of examine things maybe you've been pushing aside for a long time. But that's one of the reasons why every year I love to go because truly you have no Wi-Fi and you are there with not only your thoughts, but also these magnificent trees, these beautiful animals, these vistas that are just incredible. and you can hike and go in the lakes. It's just an incredible place to me that brings us back to who we really are.
I could not agree more. We are natural human beings meant to unite with nature, meant to be in nature. And we've often cooped ourselves up into office buildings all day long with no real sunlight. And yes, it just feels so good. I could see you escaping. And if you're ever missing, I'm going to look for you in the Adirondacks.
They're Colorado.
Okay. So listeners, thanks for joining us. Please pick up this book by Karma Brown. We just really adored it. All women everywhere. And not only women, men too. You need to figure out who you really are and connect with your talents and your gifts and your purpose. This book is for everybody. And I'm going to leave you with a few storm predictions. We've got great things ahead. Lisa C. with Lady Tan's Circle of Women, Patricia Cornwell, Unnatural Death, Tess Gerritsen, Spy Coast, Jenny Colgan, Midnight at the Christmas Bookshop, Jacqueline Michard, A Very Inconvenient Scandal, and John Mars, The Vacation.
Oh, I can't wait to talk about all of those. And listeners, thank you so much for sharing our socials, for listening, for tuning in. We love to hear from you. And we are just excited because we're bringing you these fantastic authors and we're having these deep discussions that are in a respectful atmosphere. We may have different opinions, but we love being able to talk about these are deep, real issues, real life issues. So keep joining us. You can find us on a number of social media platforms, BOOKSTORMPodcast.com, our website. You can see all of our old episodes there. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, on X, and you can find us on YouTube. Search for Bookstorm and Podcast, and hopefully we'll come right up, and you'll see we have a whole lot of authors there that you'll love to listen to. So until next time, listeners, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.